Salutations and welcome, friends, to another Spotlight Series video here on Trust the Profits. We are going to be highlighting Rocket Can in this episode for Bill Mott. But before we get to that, make sure to press that subscribe button here on YouTube to get all of our Kentucky Derby content here on Trust the Profits. We have so much coming out every single day, from the fastest 2 minutes to these spotlights to graded stakes previews, live betting, doubling down with Colin Sheehan, capping the card, full field rundowns with the Formula, who I am joined by today. Formula, thanks so much for being here. And here we are talking about Rocket Can, kind of
Yeah.
an interesting horse for Bill Mott and his
Yeah.
only entry in this race, a horse that won a prep race down at Gulfstream Park, then kind of almost was elevated by losing to Forte, but maybe a little disappointing last time out.
Yeah. I mean, Rocket Can to me, spoiler alert here, I'm going to jump to my conclusion. He feels like that typical middle of the pack Derby horse. He's going to place anywhere from 9th to 13th, just based on all the races we've seen. He beats the bad horses, loses to the good horses, finds himself in that second tier, which at the Derby is going to get you in that backpack most likely, right? Because that first tier is going to be really strong. And then there's really like that other tier that's really fighting to win. And Rocket Can, I think, falls into the second tier. It's just happy to be there and probably doing a lot better than the worst horses, but not doing nearly as good as the other horses. That's my quick 1 minute elevator pitch on Rocket Can.
Well, I think it's an accurate one, because the thing is, you look at this experience that Rocket Can has. We should mention broke his
Yeah.
maiden over the Churchill Downs surface, then ran a very competitive second, actually two confidence game in the allowance optional claiming race at Churchill Downs in November. Then took a long layoff, came back in that Holy Bull,
Yeah.
and to your point, able to beat the horses he can beat.
Right.
And that's kind of what that field was. That was not a particularly strong field in the Holy
No.
Bull, and he was able to beat that field without really much progression from a speed figure standpoint. In fact, from an Equibase standpoint, he actually took a step back in that
Right.
Holy Bull from a speed figure standpoint. I think Beyer had him at the exact same figure in the allowance and the Holy Bull race.
Yeah.
Then you see him running that Fountain of Youth stakes. He loses by about 4.5 lengths to Forte. And I thought it was so interesting, because I feel like the discourse around Rocket Can changed a little bit after that,
Yeah.
because I think we hold Forte in such high regard that we go, well, you finished second to Forte. There's no harm in that. This horse might be pretty good. And I think going into the Arkansas Derby, there were some expectations that he just didn't really fulfill.
Yeah. And if we talk about that loss to Forte too, and, our opinions may or may not have changed on Forte, he's done nothing but win. But in that loss to Forte, Rocket Can was 4.5 lengths behind. You can fit a whole bunch of horses in between there. So now you're talking about, well, who else was in the Fountain of Youth, right?
Right.
He didn't beat Forte. Who did he beat? Not a whole
Yeah.
lot. And you look at Holy Bull. Who did he beat in that race? Nobody
Yeah.
going to the Kentucky Derby except Lord Miles, and Lord Miles probably didn't have enough distance in front of him to close out like Lord Miles did earlier at the Wood Memorial, or later, I should say, at the Wood Memorial, right?
Yeah.
Wood Miles being a little bit of a shocker at that time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes down to, how do you judge the Fountain of Youth? Do you look at that as being, hey, he was second best to the best? Or do you look at that as being, well, in that field, there was Forte, there was everyone else, and he was the first of everyone else. And I think it's the latter for me.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get too excited for Rocket Can. We should mention that Bill Mott has made some changes leading into this race. There are going to be some equipment changes. He is training with blinkers on. Bill Mott indicated that is the intent for the race, that he will actually have the blinkers on as well. One of the things I thought that was quite telling when Mott was asked about this was, he insinuated that Rocket Can had plenty left in the tank after that Arkansas Derby, and that he simply did not want to pass other horses. And if you remember that race, it was Angel of Empire by about 4.5 lengths over everyone else. And if you remember, King Russell, Reincarnate, and Rocket Can were all kind of running together there in second, third, and fourth. That does lend some credence to Mott's theory that this horse wants to run with other horses rather than pass them. Blinkers obviously is a way of trying to rectify that situation, to get the horse focused on what's in front of them rather than what's around them. but it's still a risky proposition going into the Kentucky Derby, making
Yeah.
this sort of an equipment change.
Bill Mott just made me a little bit angry there because that really spoiled my trifecta when King Russell popped his way in there instead of Rocket Can. Um, that aside, yeah, it is interesting because once again, he found himself in the second tier, 4.5
Yeah.
lengths behind the winner. He was in a group that included Reincarnate, who's going to be in the Derby as well.
Hmm.
What do you think of Reincarnate? Um, I think of him as being in that same spot as Rocket Can, where it's like, okay, I feel like Reincarnate's probably going to finish somewhere from 8th to 13th in the Derby. Maybe he pops up a little bit higher because he has had some good races, but even the good races he's had, and I don't want to turn this into Reincarnate, but even the good races
Yeah.
he's had, it's been small fields, so you can't really
Yeah.
judge a lot. The one thing I do like about Rocket Can, though, is in my notes every time going into a stakes race, I kept writing down loves the distance, loves the distance. So there was always
Hmm.
something about him early on that seemed to denote that, okay, when he stretches out and goes long distances, he should be okay. But the problem is we see him in some of these longer races going 9 furlongs, and instead of eating away at that distance between him and first place, he's sort of falling back and regressing a little bit, which doesn't
Yeah.
really bode well. I'm not
Yeah.
want to bet on a horse that's going to just run with other horses too. That doesn't get me too excited, Bill Mott.
Yeah, as well, especially when in a field where there's going to be 19 other horses for him to run with, and that's very
Yes.
concerning to see. Obviously,
Oh
like you
yeah.
said, the pedigree is there into Mischief up top, a Dam out of Tappet underneath. Should
Yeah.
absolutely like the distance. And one of the things I will say about Rocket Can, if you're looking for maybe why he was always 4.5 lengths back, it seems like he is a horse that when you go back and watch, whether it's the Holy Bull, the Fountain of Youth, the Arkansas Derby, this horse. And I don't know if it's on Junior Alvarado, the jockey. I don't know if it's on the horse. I don't know what it is. This horse is always parked 4 wide, going around both turns, it feels like, and
Yeah.
just loses ground constantly to his competitors. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, however long the race is, it feels like he's making it that much longer for himself by taking these wide circuitous routes. And he just gets hung wide a lot of times. And
Yeah.
so that's obviously not another great trait to have in the Derby when you could be parked, 5, 6 wide potentially
5, 6
going into
wide.
the first turn. So,
Yeah.
if he can solve that, maybe there's something there. Maybe the 10 furlongs is the distance that he's going to ultimately like, and he'll kind of eat away at some horses late. But I
Yeah.
like you, I have a hard time seeing him even getting up into the superfecta. I'd imagine that in my opinion, his ceiling is probably around where you said. I think 6th, 7th, it would be kind of his ceiling. I think more likely, like you said, probably around 8th, 9th, 10th,
Yeah.
mid-pack type of a horse just feels like in this particular race. But one, I've used him as an example of a horse that, quite frankly, we need more of, which is I have a feeling after the Kentucky Derby, he's going to be this kind of hard knocking horse that just goes to different grade 2, grade 3 type of races, the West Virginia Derby, the Ohio Derby, places like that, and kind of does well and maybe has a really nice career at 4 and 5 years old.
Yeah. Maybe he runs the Haskell, right? He's one of those that you see just sort of hanging around, doesn't go into retirement to build more horses.
Right.
Um, he could be one of those that we see for a few years and enjoy as well. I mean, he could be one of these horses that, like I wrote in my notes, seems to like the distance. So, he runs in one of those big races. Bill Mott figures a few things out with him, tightens up those turns, figures out a way to make him want the finish line a little bit more than the next horse. And we've got a really strong horse here. I just don't see it right now for him at the Derby. I can't talk myself into him above 4 other horses.
Yeah, I can't either. And he's a horse that just to we dot every I and cross every T. He's a horse that should probably sit, mid pack, maybe a little bit more forward than that. He's not a horse
Right.
that's going to be in the pace considerations. He's also not a deep closer. So he'll be, that's the funny part. He'll be somewhere in the middle the entire way around the track, I have a feeling.
Right.
From start to finish, he'll be somewhere between like 8th and 13th.
Yeah.
And so, he's, like I said, he's, I think, an honest horse that has a lot of chances to become better as he gets older, but hard for me to get too excited for him here in this year's Kentucky Derby.
And I don't mean to catch you off guard
No.
here, but the name Rocket Can, it reminds me of something, and it reminds me of another horse, even though the name doesn't click, but the name Loggins. you see those rocket cans on the back of those those
love
fighter
it.
jets, and
I love it.
yeah, I just got to drop a logins every now and then.
Well, shout out to our boy Colin Sheehan, who is counting down the minutes and days until his boy Loggins returns to the track, if that indeed ever happens.
We do need Colin to give us a logins update at some
But
point.
no,
Yeah,
well,
that's a
listen,
great
Kenny
video.
Loggins, listen, we need some Elton John in our life too with Rocket Can and Rocket Man. So, listen, this has been fun, Formula. Really
This has been
appreciate
great.
it. Make sure if you're watching this video, press that subscribe button here on YouTube, press that like button, comment below with what you think of Rocket Can in this particular race. Maybe you think we're crazy and you're going to get a big price on Rocket Can if you think he's going to be able to win this race. So best of luck on Derby Day to all those out there listening. And until next time, my name is Matthew DeSantis. That's the Formula, and it's now post time.